YouTube, vinyl community, Brian Wilson fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens. We are here today to talk about Brian Wilson's debut album from 1988. This is Brian Wilson. Oh, look at this. Look at this. Oh, almost. Oh, that's so cool. Whoa. Anyways, um, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. We've been talking a lot about the Beach Boys on this channel, but I have not delved into solo album territory yet, so let's do this. Brian Wilson. This album was, for some people, years in the making or years of wanting to happen. And when it finally came out, it kind of put a lot of skeptics off guard because of its production and its presentation and his maturity and his voice. A lot of people at this point kind of knew Brian as just this reclusive guy who didn't want anything to do with the limelight or the Beach Boys. And the idea of him putting out confident sounding music at this point in his life was kind of a joke, for lack of a better term. If anybody had considered an album from Brian at this point of his life, a lot of people thought it wasn't going to be that good. Here's the thing. While this album does have a maturity to it, it's, in my opinion, it's really forced and it's unnatural sounding, which during this time, Brian had his very controversial therapist, Dr. Eugene Landy, controlling every second of his life. Between what he ate, who he talked to, where he went, what he did in the recording studio, every single thing was documented. All of Landy's minions were constantly around and not giving Brian any breathing room. And the result is an album that sounds like that. It sounds like an album that was forced. Landy kind of weaseled his way out of being a therapist and becoming Brian's co-writing buddy. And then they'd write songs together, and then he'd get production credits, and then he'd go out and, do promotional things with Brian, and pumping him full of chemicals that really kind of messed him up. If you see interviews with him in the 70s and early 80s, he just seems like kind of a normal dude. And then at this point in his career, he seems like robotic and tense and just uncomfortable. And like his jaw is always clenched and he looks angry and his eyes are cold and steel-like. And a lot of people associate that with either medication that Landy was putting him on, or a lot of people think he may have even had a stroke at some point. I'm not sure how much truth there is in that. But Brian was basically brainwashed for a while there. And so this album came to be because Lenny Waronker and Seymour Stein, two of the big label guys in the 80s on Warner Records and Sire, kind of had a meeting of the minds after seeing Brian do a version of On Broadway solo. And they thought, you know what, it might be good to have Brian do a solo album, just to see what can happen. And so after a year of recording, and apparently it took $1 million to produce this thing, like, holy crap, this is what happened. The story leading up to this album is just a story of constant struggle between the people who wanted to see Brian do his best, like Andy Paley, who was here to produce a lot of the album and co-write some of the songs, and then there were people who wanted to have their way, like Landy. There's a classic story of Brian having sung a set of lyrics that he wrote and really liked, and Landy said something like, "You do realize the ones that we wrote were better, you're not going to get that milkshake now." And Brian was like, okay, yeah, those lyrics are better, let's do that. So, like, a lot of that kind of crap went on, and I think it was Andy Paley who said that this album, a lot of the good bits were made on stolen time, when Landy wasn't there. I mean, he would even go so far as to take the tapes to another studio, like another room, do a bunch of work to them, just so the guys in Brian's band couldn't mess with them, because Landy wanted things his way. He'd give lyrics that he thought should be written or sung the way he wanted them to be sung, or just having his hand in the pot the whole time. Meanwhile, the people behind the scenes, even like the big time people like Lenny Waronker and Seymour Stein, were like, we want Brian to write something like Cool Cool Water again. Just like kind of some weirder stuff. Like, here were guys running a label willing to give Brian the chance to do something creative. And here was someone like Landy just wanting to jump on the rock and roll bandwagon and milk this guy for all he was worth. So the resulting album is very of its time. It's very synth heavy, lots of keyboards, lots of computerized stuff going on. It's okay. definitely not my favorite Brian Wilson album. He's got a lot better when it comes to solo albums. A lot of people at the time called it Pet Sounds 2. I don't see that at all. Okay, so Brian wrote an album pretty much by himself. That doesn't mean it's Pet Sounds 2. If anything, stylistically, you can call it Love You 2 or Brian Still Loves You because there's just so much synth on it, just like how Love You did. But overall, I mean, the lyrics on this album, sometimes there's some really good lines, sometimes there's some really cheesy lines, but that's because he was co-writing with some other people, and, Landy did have some say on this album. But some of the best songs were the ones he either wrote just by himself or with people who weren't Landy. So, let's jump into this journey here. Here's the back cover. Love and Mercy is the first song on the LP, and the big single, I guess you can call from it. And it's been a staple of his live set list forever. It really is a fantastic song, but this version of it for me feels so stifled and just pounding you in the head with these synths, and it's like, it's too much. Right off the bat, it's just like this, just a mass craziness of synthesizers, and you're like, alright, well, let's just see where it goes from here. But I mean, the lyrics on this song are fantastic. It's just a really great song, and he wanted the album to have a message of love and peace, and I think that's a great way to start. And I love that this song has stayed in his set list and has become kind of his mantra at this point. It's a fantastic song, but literally every other version after this has been so much better. Walking the Line. This is where we start walking the line of who's really doing this album. Is it Brian on his own will, or is it Landy forcing Brian to be a dancing bear and go out there and do an album? Whew. Walking the Line is okay. Hearing Brian kind of like yell the chorus a little bit, it's kind of fun, but you picture him in that tense jaw, clenched, steely-eyed, manic way, and you feel bad for him, kind of like singing this, like yelling this thing, trying to be like this pop star, trying to be this rock and roll guy, when we all know who he is. He's a really sweet guy who makes beautiful melodies, and here he is like screaming this pop hook, and it's like, iffy on that one. Melt Away, that's a beautiful song. I really do enjoy that one. Again, I think there's better versions of that elsewhere. But the lyrics on this are pretty cool, and apparently there was one line they were working on that I guess the producer, it was Andy or somebody, was like, yeah, not really feeling that line. Could you change that one, Brian? Just off the top of your head. And apparently he paced around saying, I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it. Not sure if that meant he's going to get it from Landy, or like, I'm going to get it, I'll get the words and we'll get through this. And then just like that, he came up with the Island and Smilin' line. I felt just like an island until I saw you smile, and my blues just melt away. And like, that's a fantastic line. That's a crazy good line. There's definitely some Pet Sounds moments in the drums in that part that have a little bit of that kind of God Only Knows-ish feel. I don't know, maybe people felt like that was Pet Sounds or something just because the drums did the same fill. Whatever. Baby Let Your Hair Grow Long. Apparently that's a response to Caroline No. It's supposed to be like, as Brian put it, a sexual song. He's always saying things like that, like Darling is a sexual song. That's okay. It's kind of interesting to hear Brian play with weird melodies again, but like it doesn't have that spooky fun vibe. It's got that spooky you're on bad medicine vibe. Like, a little uncomfortable there. But it's not a bad song. It plays with that awkward timing, and then the chorus kind of has like a conventional sounding pop chorus, but the chords that are used to do that are very Brian Wilson. There's a lot of unexpected changes that happen, which is very Brian. Little Children, this song, for me, it's a complete throwaway, and the chorus rips off Mountain of Love. This song has never done anything for me. It's just nothing at all. One for the Boys is like his Beach Boys tribute, and again, sounds super forced to me. It doesn't do anything. It has a cheesy, nostalgic, for the sake of nostalgia vibe. It just sounds forced. There's So Many. That's not too bad of a song. It's got some cool chord progressions, and I like the pre-chorus stuff, so that's not too bad of a track. Side 2 is a little interesting. He kind of expands a little bit more into the pop realm of a little more like serious pop songs, which is what Brian was always really good at. It opens with Nighttime, And if anyone has been on YouTube, you can watch these really awkward videos of Brian in leather pants getting paraded about on stage, lurching around under Landy's supervision to make him look like this like macho pop star. And you can tell he's super uncomfortable and he probably doesn't want to be there. And watching him sing this pretty awful song is just really heart-wrenching and super cringeworthy. It's not a terrible song. It definitely sticks in your head, but the whole monotonous "nighttime is the right time," like, you're way better than that, Brian. That's so beneath you to write something like that. I think even the most hardcore Beach Boys fans would be like, yeah, that's not you at all. Um, I mean, it's not the worst thing he's ever done, but in my opinion, I feel like it's up there. Let It Shine, I love that song. I think that's a great song. He co-wrote that with Jeff Lynne, and a lot of people think it's way more of an ELO song than it is a Brian Wilson song. I don't feel that vibe. I get a lot of Brian Wilson on that because I think Jeff Lynne was influenced by the Beatles and the Beach Boys to write the ELO songs. I mean, if he's going to write with Brian, it's going to sound like a Brian song. And his falsettos on that song are really good, and the background vocals are really good. There's a looseness to that song that sounds like the tension was out of the room for a couple hours and they had time to themselves to think and just be themselves and write a song. Whereas a lot of this album doesn't have that. It just has this tense feeling like they're trying so hard to make him into this like giant modern solo pop star. Just let him go in the room by himself and just do what he does and just see what happens. It's gonna be good. I mean, every album he's put out after this has been really good. So, yeah, Meet Me in My Dreams Tonight. I also really like that song too. Kind of your typical 60s sounding beat, but it's got that modern twist with the production and his vocal styles. And in that song, I kind of like the nostalgia feel because it kind of sounds like, a guy in his 40s just imagining what it was like back when he was in his 20s, hanging out with, maybe his first few girlfriends or something. I kind of like that vibe. That vibe works on this song. And I'm probably in the super minority here, but the last song, Rio Grande, I got nothing to say about that one. To me, that sounds like the most forced thing Brian has ever done. I'm probably not going to make a lot of friends on this on this one. It's so pandering. It's so remember what I did in the 60s. It's so look at me trying to emulate things that you were familiar with and remember how great Pet Sounds was. Oh yeah, Smile never came out, but it was really cool how he's sweeping epics. Let's make Brian do that again, but in the 80s. And apparently Landy wanted to call it Life Suite and had all these lyrics written for it, and whoever was in charge of that session told him to get out and they let Brian do what he wanted to do. I don't know, if he was happy making this album or happy making these songs in particular, especially something like Rio Grande or Nighttime, then that's great. I'm happy for him if he did have a good time doing this. But again, this is just my opinion, and I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this one because I'm not liking this album as much as maybe some people do. Overall, I really don't think it's a terrible album. For me personally, I think it's his worst solo album. But you gotta understand, even Brian Wilson at his worst is still the best of what some other people would be able to accomplish. So let me show you a K-single. This is the Love and Mercy K-single, and on the back is a song called "He Couldn't Get His Poor Old Body to Move." So that's what that looks like. And the album's been reissued a couple of times. This is a record store day release. I think it's on Blue Swirl colored vinyl. And it's the expanded edition, so it's got like the CD that came out in the early 2000s has all these demos and a couple of interviews and a Christmas track. All of that is on this set. So that's pretty cool to hear like the demos, kind of see where they were going with it. The original album is loaded with Landy's name all over it as executive producer and co-songwriter, and his name is on the record. I mean, it's everywhere. But on every subsequent reissue, it was taken off. But this is what the inside looks like. And it's got the lyrics in the back. So, I mean, this was an awkward time, an awful time for Brian with going through this therapy where he wasn't allowed to see his family or friends or bandmates. And then eventually, pretty shortly after this, within a couple of years, they were able to get rid of him and kind of let Brian come back to earth and be himself. And he ended up putting out some of the best music of his career after that. Like, I think Imagination's a really good album. That Lucky Old Son, I think that Lucky Old Son is a fantastic album. I really, really enjoy that one. You know, he finished Smile. There's a lot of good stuff that came out after this one. This is definitely a good start. And it would have been interesting to see what would have happened had this vein of creativity continue, because apparently he wrote like 100 songs in the early 80s or something, so I'm not sure how much of that came into this, like when these songs were written, if most of these were new at the time because Landy was involved. Not sure about that. So there's a lot that could be said for this album in just the fact that it exists, and kind of what came next. I mean, his next solo album wasn't until 10 years later after this one came out. So yeah, oh boy. So this is a long video. If I had to give this thing a rating, I'd probably give it like a 6, maybe a 5. I'm kind of neutral on it. Again, not my favorite thing he's ever done, and I'm really, really curious to see what you guys have to think about this one, or have to say rather. Because I think it's a really divisive album. I think people are kind of split on this one about how they're supposed to feel. Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of why this channel exists, is so we can talk about music, and it's just an opinion. Like, I'm not going to get mad if you guys disagree with me, and I hope you don't get mad if you disagree with me, because we're just here to have fun. So, yeah, this is it, you guys. I'm going to go with a 5 on this thing. Not terrible, not his best, but there are some good moments on it. Love and Mercy, Let It Shine, Meet Me in My Dreams Tonight, Melt Away. So, there's a good Brian Wilson EP tucked away in this thing. Anyways, my name is Giggens. This has been Album Reviews with Brian Wilson. Self-titled Brian Wilson, 1988. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.